Imagine handing a small silver coin to an animal that has never seen money before. No instructions, no training manual, just a coin and a choice. Now imagine that within weeks, that same animal had not only learned what money was, but had figured out how to steal it, how to negotiate with it, and how to use it in ways that would make an economist's jaw drop. This isn't a thought experiment. This actually happened. And what those monkeys did next forced scientists to completely rewrite what they thought they knew about the origins of human economic behavior. For most of history, we've drawn a very clear line between ourselves and the rest of the animal kingdom. We build cities, we write laws, we trade stocks. Animals, we assumed, lived in a world of pure instinct: eat, survive, reproduce. No concept of value, no understanding of exchange, no capacity for abstract thinking beyond the immediate moment. Capuchin monkeys, small, agile primates native to Central and South America, fit neatly into that assumption. They're clever, yes. Researchers had already documented their ability to use tools, crack nuts, and navigate complex social hierarchies. But economics? Trade? The concept of currency? That seemed safely, uniquely human. In the early 2000s, an economist at Yale University named Keith Chen decided to test exactly that assumption. Not with a philosophical question, with a very practical experiment. He wanted to know, can a non-human primate actually understand money? Not mimic behavior, not perform tricks for a reward, understand it as a system. The answer was about to upend everything. If you find the hidden depths of animal intelligence as fascinating as I do, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next investigation into the minds of the creatures we share this planet with. Keith Chen and his collaborator Venkat Lakshminarayanan introduced a group of capuchin monkeys to small silver discs, essentially custom-made coins. At first, the coins meant nothing. The monkeys ignored them, played with them, tossed them around. Then came the training. Researchers patiently, over months, taught the monkeys that these silver discs could be exchanged for food. Hand a coin to a researcher, get a grape. Hand 2 coins, get 2 grapes. Simple, transactional, controlled. Within a matter of weeks, the monkeys had internalized the concept. But here's where it gets interesting. The scientists decided to introduce something more complex: price changes. They altered the exchange rates. Sometimes a coin would buy 1 grape. Other times, 1 coin would buy 2. The monkeys didn't just notice, they adapted. When prices dropped, they bought more. When prices rose, they bought less, rationing their coins with what economists would call rational consumer behavior. They were, functionally, responding to inflation. Let that sit for a second. These are animals with brains roughly the size of a lemon. Animals that had never, in thousands of years of evolution, encountered the concept of currency. And yet, within weeks of exposure, they had internalized supply and demand logic that many humans struggle to grasp intuitively. But the experiment was only getting started. When the researchers introduced a larger group of monkeys into the economy, giving each animal an equal budget of coins, something unexpected happened within the colony almost immediately: theft. One monkey, observed on camera, deliberately waited until a researcher's back was turned, then swept an entire tray of coins off the table and bolted. The monkey had not been trained to steal. No one had modeled that behavior. It emerged spontaneously as a rational strategy to accumulate more resources. Crime, it turns out, doesn't require civilization, just incentive. And then came the observation that made headlines around the world. During a session, one of the male monkeys was recorded handing a coin to a female monkey. The researchers initially assumed this was a random behavior, or perhaps a sharing gesture, but then the female used that coin to purchase food from the researcher, and immediately afterward engaged in a brief sexual interaction with the male who had given it to her. When the data was reviewed, the pattern was consistent. It had not been taught. It had not been suggested. It had emerged entirely on its own from the internal social dynamics of a group of primates given access to an economic system. The male monkeys had invented transactional sex. Researchers published their findings, and the scientific community went into a quiet uproar. Because what the capuchins had demonstrated wasn't just cleverness. It was the spontaneous recreation of human economic pathologies, theft, commerce, and the commodification of social interaction, in a species that had been exposed to currency for less than a year. So how do we make sense of this? To understand what Keith Chen's experiment actually revealed, you need to think about what money is at its most fundamental level. Money is not a physical thing. It's not the paper or the metal. It's a shared agreement, a social technology that encodes value, enables delayed exchange, and allows individuals to store and transfer resources across time and space. For centuries, we assumed that understanding money required a uniquely human cognitive toolkit: language, abstract reasoning, a theory of mind sophisticated enough to model what other people value. What Chen's experiment revealed is that several of these cognitive capacities exist, in rudimentary but functional form, in capuchin monkeys. Let's break down what was actually happening in that laboratory from a cognitive science perspective. First, value abstraction. The monkeys had to understand that a metal disc, which has no inherent value, no nutritional content, no biological function, could represent something else. That is a form of symbolic thinking. It's the same cognitive leap that allows human children around age 3 or 4 to understand that a piece of paper can be money. Second, delayed gratification and resource management. Some monkeys hoarded their coins rather than immediately spending them. That requires the ability to mentally project into the future, to understand that holding a resource now can benefit you later. Research by Dr. Laurie Santos at Yale, who collaborated on related work in this area, found that capuchins showed genuine evidence of future-oriented thinking in controlled settings. Third, social modeling. The theft and the transactional behaviors didn't emerge in isolation. They emerged from monkeys watching other monkeys, modeling strategies, and adapting. This is social learning, the same mechanism that drives human cultural transmission. And here is perhaps the most profound implication of all. The behaviors that emerged in that lab, hoarding, theft, prostitution, are behaviors that exist across virtually every human society in recorded history, regardless of culture, geography, or religion. Economists and anthropologists have long debated whether these behaviors are cultural products or something deeper. Chen's experiment suggests they may be evolutionary products, behaviors that emerge when any sufficiently socially complex primate is placed inside an economic system, because the cognitive architecture to exploit that system has been there, dormant, for millions of years. We didn't invent corruption, we inherited it. Have you ever witnessed an animal doing something that felt almost too human? Something that made you stop and rethink what you thought you knew about intelligence? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. After the findings went public, Keith Chen was careful to contextualize what the experiment did and did not prove. The monkeys were not moral agents. They were not making ethical decisions in any human sense. They weren't choosing to steal or commodify sex in a way that implied intent or self-awareness of wrongdoing. What they were doing was more unsettling in a different way. They were following the internal logic of an economic system to its natural conclusion, with none of the cultural breaks, legal structures, or moral frameworks that human societies have built up over millennia precisely to counteract those impulses. In other words, the guardrails we think of as civilization may be less about enabling human nature and more about restraining it. The colony that participated in the experiment was eventually disbanded as a controlled economic group, partly because the social dynamics had become difficult to manage. The introduction of currency had, in a matter of months, introduced a layer of social complexity, inequality, strategic behavior, transactional relationships that hadn't existed before. Sound familiar? Dr. Santos, who went on to run the famous Laurie Santos Happiness Lab at Yale and study monkey decision-making extensively, reflected on what the capuchin experiments revealed about human irrationality. Because here's the twist. The monkeys didn't just reproduce human economic behaviors. They reproduced human economic biases. They were loss-averse, meaning they responded more strongly to losing a coin than to gaining one, exactly mirroring what Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman documented in humans. They made irrational choices when presented with framed options. They gambled. Every cognitive shortcut that makes human beings vulnerable to financial manipulation, bad investment decisions, and economic self-sabotage, the capuchins had them too, which tells us something humbling. These are not bugs in human cognition. They are ancient features, evolutionary heuristics baked into the primate brain long before stock markets, casinos, or credit card debt existed. We are, in many ways, still running on the same cognitive hardware as a small monkey sitting in a Yale laboratory, turning a silver coin over in its fingers, trying to figure out the best deal it can get. Here's what Keith Chen's experiment ultimately revealed. And it's not that monkeys are like us. It's that we are, in fundamental ways, still like them. The capacity for economic reasoning, for strategic social behavior, for understanding value and exchange. These did not emerge fully formed in modern humans. They evolved, piece by piece, over tens of millions of years of primate social life. When we look at a capuchin monkey figuring out how to steal coins, we're not seeing an animal clumsily imitating human behavior. We're seeing the deep evolutionary roots of our own minds, exposed in a laboratory, impossible to ignore. The next time you negotiate a salary, make an impulse purchase, or feel the sting of a bad deal more sharply than the joy of a good one, remember a small monkey in a Yale lab holding a silver coin. It faced the same choice, and it made the same mistakes. We are not the only species with intelligence. We are not even the only species with economic intelligence. We're just the species that built a world around it and forgot to ask where it came from. If this exploration made you see the animal kingdom differently, you'll want to watch our next video, where we investigate another species whose cognitive abilities are quietly rewriting what scientists thought was possible in the non-human mind. It's on your screen right now. Nature is far more brilliant than we imagine. See you on our next exploration.